If you look far enough into the past, so far that recorded history disappears and human memory dissolves into silence, you reach a time when the world was young and unrecognizable. The land we now call Ethiopia was already ancient then. Mountains rose from the earth like broken teeth. Valleys stretched deep and wide. And rivers carved their way through stone, long before any living creature understood what a river was. The air was different, the sky was harsher, and the land carried a rawness that held secrets nobody would uncover for millions of years. Yet this rugged landscape would become the stage for one of the most important stories on Earth, the story of how humanity began. Picture the world in that distant past. No cities, no kingdoms, no written words, nothing that resembles civilization as we know it. There were only stretches of open land, shifting climates, volcanic outbursts, and primitive forests clinging to the edges of ancient lakes. Animals moved across the plains in great herds. Atmospheric dust from distant eruptions turned to light a strange gold at times. Life was simple and brutal, ruled entirely by instinct and survival. But somewhere in this wild and unpredictable environment, the earliest members of our human family took their first careful steps. Long before the first farmers settled on Ethiopian soil, long before trade routes and empires, another story was already unfolding under the sun of the Rift Valley. Early hominins, small and fragile compared to the predators around them, learned to stand upright. They learned to move across the land on 2 feet, freeing their hands, sharpening their senses, and opening a path toward what they would eventually become. They didn't know that humanity's story would one day be traced back to them, but the land remembered. The soil preserved fragments of their existence, holding them in silence until they were finally found millions of years later. Among those discoveries was a name that would echo across the world, Lucy. Found in the Afar region in 1974. She lived more than 3 million years ago. Her bones revealed something priceless. She walked upright. She moved in a way closer to us than to the apes she resembled. Her existence proved that an important chapter of human evolution happened on this land. But Lucy was only a single clue. Ethiopia would continue to reveal others. Fossils much older than Lucy emerged from the earth, including the remains of Ardipithecus, a creature older, stranger, and yet clearly part of our long ancestral path. More recent discoveries showed early Homo sapiens living in Ethiopia more than 150,000 years ago, long before humans spread to the rest of the world. Each discovery deepened the mystery. Why this land? Why here? The answer lies beneath the surface. Ethiopia sits along the Great Rift Valley, a geological scar that holds layers of time stacked like pages in a book. Volcanic ash sealed fossils in place. Shifting plates lifted and exposed. The erosion slowly revealed the bones to the world. The land acted as a natural archive, preserving the evidence of hominins, early humans, and the creatures that lived alongside them. This is why Ethiopia became indispensable in understanding human origins. It wasn't only that early humans lived here. It was that the land kept their memory intact. As the ages passed and early humans became more capable, Ethiopia changed with them. The prehistoric cultures that developed across the region marked a slow but powerful evolution in human behavior. Simple stone tools were shaped by hand, struck with precision and intention. These tools speak of minds that were learning to solve problems, to adapt, to plan. The people who crafted them were nomadic, following animals and seasons. They left behind flakes of stone, campfire remnants, and bones cracked open for marrow. These traces show that life was not random or mindless. It was part of a growing intelligence, a gradual journey toward understanding the world. Over thousands of years, these early communities began to refine their knowledge. They developed better tools, not just for cutting but for piercing, scraping, shaping, even preparing hides and plants. They began observing the environment in more detail. They learned the timing of rains and migrations. They recognized edible plants, safe paths, and the dangers hidden in certain forests or valleys. Their culture wasn't written down, but it lived in the way they taught their children, how they hunted, how they shared food, and how they navigated the land. Then, slowly, a shift began. Human groups that had once moved constantly started returning to familiar places. The first signs of early settlements appeared. These were not towns or villages in the modern sense, but they were rooted. Families stopped wandering endlessly and began to stay near sources of water, fertile patches of land, or areas where animals consistently gathered. With stability came experimentation. People learned which plants could be gathered again and again. They became more skilled at controlling fire. They developed early forms of organization. They buried their dead with objects and signs of care, an early hint of spiritual thought. These small communities formed the bridge between roaming bands of hunter-gatherers and the more complex societies that would come much later. These early settlements across Ethiopia played a role in shaping identity, tradition, and survival strategies. People began to form groups defined not just by blood, but by shared practices. They carved patterns into stones. They used pigments. They created sounds, rhythms, perhaps even early forms of ritual. Ethiopia became a place where human behavior matured. The people learned not only how to survive, but how to create meaning in their lives. This growing sense of culture expanded across generations, passing knowledge forward until it became the foundation of future civilizations. The question remains, why is Ethiopia called a cradle of humanity? The phrase isn't poetic, it reflects scientific reality. Ethiopia offers a timeline of human origins that stretches across millions of years, uninterrupted. The fossils found there represent various stages of evolution, from the earliest hominins to nearly modern humans. No other region on Earth provides such a complete, layered history. The land didn't just host early humans, it protected their remains. It shaped their development. Its shifting climate forced them to adapt, evolve, and innovate. Ethiopia was both home and teacher. Human migrations may also have passed through this region as people gradually left Africa and spread across the world. Many genetic studies hint that early humans who populated distant continents likely had ancestors who once lived somewhere in this region. In this sense, Ethiopia is not just another location in human history. It is part of the shared origin story of billions of people alive today. Reflecting on this deep past changes the way you see the present. The modern world with its cities, faiths, languages, nations, and cultures often feels divided, shaped by differences. But when you look far enough back, before all these divisions existed, you reach a point where humanity was small, fragile, and united by survival alone. Those early humans were not Ethiopians or foreigners. They were not members of any group we know. They were simply the first humans, living on land, that would one day hold their story safe for millions of years. Their struggles, discoveries, mistakes, and instincts eventually shaped the entire human journey. The story of Ethiopia's origins isn't just about fossils or ancient geology. It's about understanding where we come from. It's about realizing that the earliest spark of human life flickered in a place that still carries those old memories. The mountains, the valleys, and the riverbeds hold not just stones and bones, but echoes of the first steps that led to everything our species has built since before kingdoms like Aksum rose, before monumental churches were carved into rock, before any written language captured Ethiopian history. This land had already shaped the destiny of humanity. This is the atmosphere you step into when you begin the history of Ethiopia. It is not the story of a nation alone. It is the story of human beginnings. It is the story of how the earliest members of our family lived, moved, learned, and changed. It is the quiet, ancient chapter that sets the foundation for everything that follows. Ethiopia's history does not start with emperors, battles, or monuments. It starts with footsteps in volcanic soil, with stone tools left behind on the banks of ancient lakes, with silent fossils waiting in the earth. This story, stretching across millions of years, opens the doorway to the rise of cultures, kingdoms, and ideas that would one day transform not just Ethiopia but the world. And before you explore those later chapters, you begin here, in the deep past, where the land and the first humans shaped one another, long before anyone knew the meaning of history. After the long prehistoric silence, the land that had once sheltered early humans began to change. People were no longer wandering endlessly from place to place. They were settling into patterns, building early communities, shaping tools with more intention, and learning how to control the landscape instead of simply reacting to it. Over thousands of years, these scattered groups slowly developed into organized societies. And somewhere in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia, a new kind of structure began to emerge. It wasn't a kingdom in the way we imagine great empires, but it was the beginning of something larger. The rise of the ancient polity, known as D-Mount. The story begins in the northern plateau, a region defined by steep mountains, dry valleys, and fertile pockets of land that caught seasonal rains. People lived close to these slopes, carving out space for farming and animal keeping. The land itself pushed them toward innovation. Its harshness forced communities to learn which crops could survive, when to plant, how to store food, and how to build homes that could withstand the heat of the season and the wind of the highlands. It was here, around the first millennium BCE, that traces of a more organized society started to take shape. The timeline is still debated, but the evidence speaks clearly. A political structure emerged that was more than a group of villages, more than a loose collection of families. It was something coordinated, something intentional. The people who lived in these lands began building terraces for farming, shaping irrigation channels, and storing grain in ways that showed knowledge passed down through generations. Life in this region wasn't isolated. Across the Red Sea lay the ancient civilizations of South Arabia. The waters between the two coasts were not barriers, but bridges, narrow enough for boats, winds, and trade to travel back and forth. Long before the rise of great Ethiopian empires, the people of the highlands were exchanging goods and ideas across this short stretch of water. Aromatic resins, incense, obsidian, animals, and early metal products moved in both directions. With trade came influence. Architectural styles, symbols, and even certain cultural practices show signs of this connection. But the people of D-Mount were not simply followers of external cultures. They blended what they learned with what they already knew. They took techniques from South Arabia and reshaped them for their own land. They built local temples and structures with distinct Ethiopian character. They adopted certain methods of agriculture, yet they continued cultivating native crops, raising local animals, and using methods suited to the highlands and valleys. The exchange across the sea strengthened their society without erasing its roots. Trade did more than bring goods. It brought knowledge of metal. Iron was a powerful tool, and societies that mastered it gained a tremendous advantage. In these early centuries, the people of DMT began working with iron, sharpening tools that allowed them to farm harder soils, clear land more efficiently, craft weapons, and carry out construction on a scale not possible before. Iron tools meant that fields could grow larger and more productive. More food meant more stability. With stability came population growth, and with growth came the need for leadership. This is when the political structure of DMT became more visible. Leadership wasn't accidental. It emerged because the society demanded coordination. Terraces needed maintenance. Trade contacts needed negotiation. Fields needed protection. Seasonal challenges required collective decisions. Though the full details of their political system remain lost to time, the signs show a hierarchy taking shape: local leaders, clan heads, and regional authorities guiding construction, trade, and rituals. The presence of temples suggests religious structure, and religion often played a major role in early political control. Even without written records, the remains of DMT hint at a society that was both ambitious and stable. They built settlements that lasted. They shaped the land with careful planning. They worked with iron long before many neighboring regions. And they kept a relationship with South Arabia that strengthened their economy while giving them access to new ideas. The people who lived in this early kingdom understood the land deeply. They watched the rains arrive and disappear. They planted teff, barley, and other ancient grains that sustained their communities. They raised cattle and goats on slopes that demanded endurance from both humans and animals. They built homes from stone and clay, using the highlands' natural defenses to guard against outsiders. Their society wasn't small or temporary. It was built with a sense of permanence. This early growth formed the foundation for everything that would follow. The techniques of farming, iron use, and terracing didn't vanish. They were passed down, refined, and expanded. The idea of a political center, of a recognized authority, remained long after DMT faded. Even the trade routes across the Red Sea continued to grow, becoming lifelines for later civilizations. The rise of DMT is one of those moments in Ethiopia's story where history moves from shadow into shape. Prehistoric communities become early societies. Early societies become organized states, and the land that once formed early humans now becomes home to a people learning how to build, govern, and connect with the world beyond their mountains. This is where the roots of future empires begin. The foundations laid by DMT, its agriculture, its ironworking, its trade networks, its political structure did not disappear. They became the ground upon which the next great Ethiopian civilization would rise, a civilization that would shine across Africa and beyond. But before that chapter begins, the story of DMT stands as the early spark, the first organized attempt to shape Ethiopia into a place of influence and identity. As the memory of DMT faded into the deep layers of time, a new power began to rise across the northern highlands of Ethiopia. It didn't appear suddenly. It grew over generations, shaped by trade, geography, and an emerging sense of identity. People built settlements on high plateaus that overlooked vast valleys. New leaders emerged. New ideas spread. Bit by bit, the land prepared to give rise to one of the most influential civilizations in African history. This was the moment when the kingdom of Aksum stepped forward. The story begins with the land itself. Aksum sat in a position that made it a crossroads. To the north lay the Red Sea, a door opening toward Arabia and beyond. To the west stretched trade paths leading toward the Nile. To the south and east were routes that connected to the interior of the African continent. Anyone who controlled Aksum controlled the flow of goods, ideas, and people. The early rulers of this growing kingdom understood this better than anyone. They built their capital in a place where fertile land supported agriculture, where stone for construction was abundant, and where routes to the world lay waiting. As Aksum grew, it became more than a political center. It became a hub of culture and innovation. One of the most remarkable achievements of the Aksumite civilization was the development and use of the GAX script. Before this time, written communication in the region was influenced by South Arabian scripts brought across the sea. But Aksum took the idea of writing and shaped it into something uniquely their own. GS became a language of inscriptions, administration, religion, and identity. For the first time, rulers recorded their deeds in stone. History was no longer dependent on memory alone. It had a voice carved into monuments that still stand centuries later. The creation and spread of the GS script transformed Aksum's society. It allowed the kingdom to document treaties, religious ideas, trade agreements, and royal proclamations. Language became a tool of unity. bringing together different communities under a shared system of communication. And unlike many scripts of the ancient world, GS did not vanish. Over time, it would evolve into the liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity, preserving a link from the ancient empire to the present. But Aksum's power wasn't built on writing alone. It was built on trade. The kingdom's ships sailed across the Red Sea toward Arabia and followed the Indian Ocean winds toward distant shores. Aksum's merchants traded ivory from African elephants, gold from inland mines, exotic animal skins, spices, and even live animals. In return, they brought home luxury cloth, wine, glassware, metal goods, and ideas that flowed along these ancient sea lanes. The empire became wealthy, respected, and known across continents. Trade connected Aksum not only with nearby kingdoms but also with the great powers of its time. Roman traders visited the Red Sea ports. Indian merchants exchanged goods that had crossed entire oceans. Aksum stood at the center of this global network, a silent witness to the movement of wealth and culture across vast distances. Coins minted by Aksumite kings traveled far from home, discovered centuries later in places that had never heard the empire's name but knew its currency. Among the many Aksumite rulers, one stands out as a defining figure. King Ezana. His reign marked a turning point not only for Aksum but for the region's identity. Ezana oversaw military expansion, reorganized administration, and strengthened the economy. But his most lasting legacy came from a profound decision. During his rule, Aksum adopted Christianity. This conversion didn't happen overnight. It began with contact from Christian traders, travelers, and monks who passed through the kingdom. Their ideas slowly took root. Ezana, influenced by these teachings and guided by his mentor Frumentius, embraced Christianity and declared it the official faith of the empire. This choice carried enormous weight. It aligned Aksum with the Christian world, connected it spiritually to regions as far away as the Mediterranean, and shaped Ethiopian culture for centuries to come. After Ezana's conversion, crosses replaced old symbols on Aksumite coins. Churches spread across the land. The GS script began to record Christian texts. Religion became a unifying force that strengthened the kingdom's identity and gave it a spiritual foundation that endures in Ethiopia to this day. But no empire remains at its height forever. Aksum, despite its strength, was not immune to challenges. Over time, environmental changes began to shape its future. Soil exhaustion, shifting trade routes, and changing climate patterns put pressure on agriculture and the economy. Meanwhile, new powers were rising across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, competing for control of trade. The old maritime routes that once fed Aksum's wealth shifted away, leaving the kingdom increasingly isolated. Political tensions grew. Internal instability weakened the central authority. Slowly, the brilliant metropolis that once connected Africa with the ancient world began to lose influence. Aksum did not fall in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it faded gradually, its cities shrinking, its stones slowly overtaken by time. The capital moved to the south. The kingdom's reach contracted. Eventually, the mighty empire that had once minted coins, built monumental, steely, and shaped the spiritual identity of a nation slipped into quiet obscurity. Yet Aksum never truly disappeared. Its traditions lived on. Its language survived. Its churches continued to stand. And its influence shaped the kingdoms that followed. Even after the empire declined, Ethiopia carried its legacy forward, building on the foundations laid by Aksumite builders, rulers, and thinkers. The rise and fall of Aksum tells the story of an empire that connected worlds, shaped culture, embraced faith, and left a mark impossible to erase. It stands as one of the great civilizations of the ancient world, a place where innovation, power, and identity came together to create something lasting. The power of Aksum didn't appear all at once. It grew slowly, the way a seed pushes through soil and becomes a tree. To imagine the early days of this empire, think of a highland kingdom watching the world from above. The mountains around it formed a natural shield. Rivers carved the land into fertile valleys. Caravans moved along dusty paths, carrying salt, gold, ivory, and animal skins. Every one of those routes eventually led toward Aksum. The people who built this rising kingdom had something that set them apart. They were skilled farmers, metalworkers, and traders. They understood how to shape iron into tools and weapons. They learned how to manage land that was both generous and demanding. And they were confident enough to look beyond their own world and connect with others far across the sea. As the kingdom expanded, it began developing a cultural identity strong enough to last centuries. One of the clearest signs of this identity was a new writing system. It didn't belong to Rome or Arabia or any outside power. It belonged to Aksum alone. This writing system, known as GS, carried enormous significance. It allowed stories, prayers, laws, and royal decrees to be written down instead of passed by memory. With each carved letter, Aksum stepped more firmly into history. Today, GS remains one of the world's enduring ancient scripts. It became a foundation for Ethiopian languages and helped preserve a long and rich literary tradition. While Aksum was shaping its internal world, it was also opening doors to distant lands. Its capital stood close enough to the Red Sea to act as a gateway for international trade. Roman ships came looking for luxury goods. Indian merchants brought spices and cotton. Arabian traders crossed the water in search of gold and ivory. Everyone who visited Aksum knew it as a place of wealth and influence. The bustling port of Agelis became the heart of this global network. Ships loaded with goods traveled between continents, carrying not only cargo, but ideas, beliefs, languages, and technologies. Aksum grew because it didn't turn inward. It welcomed the world, learned from it, and used those lessons to strengthen itself. It was during this era of expansion that a young ruler named Ezana stepped into power. His reign would change Aksum forever. The story goes that Ezana was influenced by a mentor who followed a new faith spreading through distant lands. That faith was Christianity. At first, it was only a whisper in Aksum, but Ezana listened. Over time, he came to believe it was the path forward for his kingdom. When Ezana declared Christianity the official religion, he didn't just convert personally. He transformed the cultural identity of an entire empire. Churches were built, crosses were carved on monumental stones. Coins minted during his reign bore Christian symbols. The first time this had happened in any African kingdom, Ezana's decision echoed across continents. It placed Aksum among the earliest Christian states in the world. It created a spiritual tradition that would last for more than 1,000 years and remain central to Ethiopian identity. But even the strongest empires face hardship. Over time, Aksum encountered pressures it couldn't avoid. New powers began rising in Arabia. Trade routes shifted. Climate patterns changed, affecting agriculture. Gradually, the ports that once carried Aksumite goods grew quiet. The wealth that had flowed into the empire slowed to a trickle. Aksum didn't fall in a single moment. It faded, step by step. Its capital moved. Its influence shrank. And yet, even as the political structure weakened, the culture survived. The language endured. The religious traditions stayed firm. The legacy refused to disappear. The story of Aksum's decline isn't one of destruction. It's one of transformation. What remained formed the roots of the kingdoms that would rise later. Its spirit carried forward into the next chapters of Ethiopia's history, where new leaders, new faiths, and new struggles would shape the land once again. For centuries, Aksum had been the heart of Ethiopian power. But history never stands still. As the empire weakened and its reach faded, new leaders began rising in the highlands to the south. Their ascent wasn't sudden. It happened quietly, almost like a dawn that begins as a faint line of light before anyone realizes morning has arrived. The shift of power from Aksum to these new rulers marked a turning point. Caravans that once traveled toward Aksum's great stele now moved along different roads. New alliances formed. Old ones broke apart. Villages that once followed imperial orders from the north started listening to kings much closer to home. Bit by bit, the center of gravity relocated to a region that felt both familiar and entirely new. This was the beginning of the Zog era. The Zog rulers understood something Aksum once understood well. A kingdom survives when its leaders offer stability, faith, and identity. They had no intention of letting Ethiopia sink into obscurity after Aksum's decline. They stepped in determined to restore order and build a legacy of their own. Their dynasty would never reach the scale of Aksum's golden age. But what they accomplished became one of the most remarkable chapters in Ethiopian history. Among all the Zagwe kings, one name rises above the rest. Lalibela. His story feels almost like a legend told beside a fire. Passed from generation to generation. He inherited a kingdom that needed unity. He lived during a time when travel to Jerusalem had become dangerous, and the faithful felt cut off from a holy land they longed to see. Instead of despairing, he chose to build a solution with his own hands. Lalibela began carving churches from solid rock. Not from stones stacked on top of one another, but from the very ground beneath his feet. Workers chiseled downwards, removing everything that wasn't meant to remain, shaping entire sanctuaries from a single block of volcanic stone. It was an architectural approach almost no one else in the world dared attempt, and it required a vision far larger than most rulers possessed. Imagine standing at the edge of a deep trench carved into living rock. At the bottom rests a church, complete and proportional, like something lowered gently into place from the sky. But it wasn't placed there, it emerged. Each wall, each window, each stairway appeared as workers removed layer after layer of earth. It was creation by subtraction. These rock-cut churches weren't random structures. Lalibela meant for them to represent a spiritual map of Jerusalem. In a time of danger and conflict, he wanted Ethiopia to have a sacred city of its own. Pilgrims could walk through its pathways, cross its carved bridges, enter its dark stone halls, and feel connected to the heart of their faith without risking their lives on a long and perilous journey. The craftsmanship of these churches still leaves architects and historians amazed. Narrow passageways weave through the stone like arteries. Sunlight falls through openings carved with careful precision. Water channels were built to guide rain away from the courtyards. Each detail speaks of patience, devotion, and a level of engineering far ahead of its time. But the true legacy of Lalibela's project isn't just architecture. It is the way these structures shaped Ethiopian identity. For centuries, monks prayed in those stone chambers. Pilgrims traveled across mountains to walk barefoot along the same paths. Generations before them had walked. Children grew up hearing stories of how angels helped carve the walls at night while workers rested. Whether legend or truth, the belief itself became part of the cultural memory. The Zag dynasty's strength rested on this intertwining of faith and leadership. Their power wasn't only political, it was spiritual. They acted as guardians of tradition at a moment when Ethiopia needed something solid to hold on to. Even after their dynasty ended, their influence didn't fade. The rock-hewn churches remained active places of worship. Their unique architectural style inspired later builders, and their belief that Ethiopia could shape its own sacred identity became a guiding idea for centuries. In the bigger story of Ethiopia, the Zagyo period may not have lasted as long as the empires before or after it, but its impact runs deep. It preserved stability after Aksum's fall. It strengthened Christianity in the highlands, and it left behind stone monuments so enduring that they seem almost eternal, rooted in the earth yet rising toward the sky. When people speak of Ethiopia's spiritual heritage, they often begin with Lalibela's carved city. It stands as proof that even in times of uncertainty, vision and faith can create wonders that outlive kingdoms. The Zagyo dynasty may have come from a period of transition, but what they left behind became timeless. The world around the Zagwe kingdom continued to change, but the heart of its power stayed steady. After Lalibela's massive building project, the dynasty didn't simply pause and admire what had been created. They treated those stone structures as living spaces, places where rituals, festivals, and prayers became part of the kingdom's rhythm. The churches weren't monuments to be visited. They were centers of life. Monks walked through their quiet corridors in the early morning, chanting prayers that echoed softly off the carved walls. Pilgrims arrived dusty and tired from long journeys, carrying stories from remote villages. The stone absorbed it all. Every footstep, every whispered prayer, every celebration became part of the place. The Zag rulers understood that faith wasn't separate from governance. It was woven into their rule. They used their influence to protect religious traditions, support monasteries, and encourage scholarship. In those carved sanctuaries, scribes copied holy texts by hand. Students learned to read the ancient Ge'ez script. The kingdom may have shifted south from Aksum, but its spiritual foundation stayed strong. As more churches were completed, an architectural language started to develop. Carvers learned how to shape columns directly from the rock, leaving them attached at the base and the roof. They experimented with windows, arches, and decorative carvings that blended Ethiopian tradition with influences from places far beyond the highlands. Travelers who arrived from other lands often stared in disbelief. They had seen temples, palaces, and fortresses, but never a structure that rose from the ground because the earth itself had been hollowed out. These designs weren't limited to Lalibela's city alone. Across the region, small monasteries and hidden churches appeared, carved into cliffs or tucked inside caves. The kingdom had discovered a style that felt unmistakably its own. It didn't imitate foreign empires. It didn't depend on imported materials. It grew from the land and symbolized the unity of the people with their environment. But the legacy of the Zag dynasty went deeper than architecture. Their rule strengthened the religious identity of the Ethiopian highlands at a time when outside pressures, new faiths, shifting trade routes, political rivalries were beginning to reshape the region. While other powers in Africa and the Middle East struggled with internal divisions, Ethiopia remained a spiritual fortress. The Zag kings didn't isolate the kingdom, they anchored it. Generations later, travelers who visited the rock-hewn churches described a sense of stepping into another world. Sunlight filtered through narrow openings, casting long, sharp beams across stone floors. The silence inside each chamber felt ancient and heavy, as if time moved differently there. Even today, you can walk into one of Lalibela's churches and feel the weight of centuries pressing gently around you. People often say the Zag dynasty was a bridge between Aksum's greatness and the rise of the Solomonic line that would follow. There is truth in that, but calling it only a bridge ignores its deeper contribution. The Zag era didn't just preserve history. It created a new chapter. It showed Ethiopia that identity could shift without breaking. It proved that spiritual leadership could be as powerful as military might. And it left behind a legacy so solid and permanent that it still stands, carved into the very bones of the earth. As the dynasty approached its final years, its rulers must have known they had built something far larger than themselves. Dynasties fall, power shifts, history moves forward, but stone remembers. And in that stone, the Zagwe kings left their voice. Their era would end, a new lineage would rise and claim the throne. But the quiet strength of those rock-cut wonders would remain, anchoring Ethiopia's identity for hundreds of years to come. The Solomonic dynasty holds a special place in the history of Ethiopia. not only for its political achievements but also for the way it tied the nation's identity to a story that stretches back thousands of years. According to tradition, this dynasty claimed direct descent from the legendary King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, a connection that gave the rulers a sacred legitimacy and set them apart as divinely ordained leaders. This claim was more than a story. It was a powerful symbol, linking Ethiopia to the biblical world and to a narrative of wisdom, wealth, and divine favor. The story begins with the Queen of Sheba, who is said to have traveled from her kingdom in Ethiopia to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon. According to legend, she was so impressed by his wisdom that she bore him a son, Menelik I, who would later return to Ethiopia to become its first Solomonic ruler. This lineage became the backbone of the dynasty's claim to legitimacy, and it was used to reinforce their authority across centuries. The Solomonic rulers were seen not merely as kings, but as custodians of a sacred heritage, tasked with maintaining the moral and spiritual integrity of the nation. The dynasty rose to prominence in the 13th century after the decline of the Zag dynasty. While the Zagwe kings had established impressive religious monuments, such as the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, the Solomonic rulers sought to consolidate political power and expand the kingdom. Their rise marked a new chapter of Ethiopian history, characterized by territorial growth, increased administrative sophistication, and cultural flourishing. The capital was moved to larger cities over time, reflecting the dynasty's ambition to create a centralized state capable of controlling its vast and diverse territories. Expansion under the Solomonic dynasty was ambitious but fraught with challenges. The rulers sought to extend their influence over neighboring states, often engaging in both military campaigns and diplomatic efforts. Conflicts with neighboring regions, such as the Muslim sultanates in the east and various highland principalities, were frequent. Battles were fought not only for control of territory, but also for access to trade routes, resources, and strategic positions. The Solomonic kings were both warriors and statesmen, balancing the need for military might with the necessity of forging alliances. In many cases, their success depended on the loyalty of regional nobles and the ability to integrate conquered territories into the empire's political structure. Despite these challenges, the Solomonic era is often remembered as a golden age of literature, religion, and culture. The rulers were great patrons of the arts, commissioning manuscripts, religious texts, and chronicles that celebrated both their achievements and Ethiopia's ancient heritage. Monasteries and churches became centers of learning, preserving knowledge in theology, philosophy, history, and poetry. These works were written in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, which served as a literary and liturgical medium for centuries. The flourishing of literature during this period helped to shape a unique Ethiopian identity that combined faith, tradition, and intellectual achievement. Religion played a central role in the Solomonic dynasty's governance. Christianity, which had been adopted by the Aksumite Empire centuries earlier, was elevated as the unifying force of the kingdom. The emperor was not only a political leader but also seen as a spiritual figure, responsible for protecting the faith and promoting religious observance. This divine aspect of kingship reinforced the Solomonic claim of descent from Solomon, tying political authority directly to spiritual legitimacy. Religious ceremonies, festivals, and the construction of churches and monasteries became key instruments of governance and cultural expression. The dynasty also faced internal challenges, particularly from regional nobles and ambitious local leaders who sought autonomy. Managing these relationships required careful diplomacy, strategic marriages, and sometimes force. The emperors implemented administrative reforms, establishing a hierarchy of governors, tax collectors, and military commanders to maintain control over distant provinces. This administrative network helped ensure that the empire remained cohesive even as it expanded and faced external threats. Trade and diplomacy were equally important in consolidating the power of the Solomonic dynasty. Ethiopia's location along the Red Sea allowed it to interact with the wider world, including Europe, the Middle East, and other African kingdoms. Trade brought wealth and exotic goods to the empire, while diplomatic missions helped secure alliances and peace treaties. These interactions enriched Ethiopian culture, introducing new ideas, artistic styles, and technological innovations while reinforcing the kingdom's independence and sovereignty. Cultural achievements during the Solomonic period were remarkable. Artists, scribes, and architects were commissioned to create elaborate religious icons, illuminated manuscripts, and monumental buildings. The style of these works reflected a unique synthesis of indigenous African traditions, with influences from the Middle East and beyond. Poetry and oral storytelling thrived, celebrating the deeds of kings, the wisdom of Solomon, and the heroic acts of warriors defending the realm. The dynasty's commitment to culture ensured that Ethiopia maintained a vibrant intellectual and artistic life, even in times of political strife. Education also expanded under the Solomonic rulers. Monastic schools taught theology, philosophy, law, and literature, producing generations of scholars who would serve as advisors, religious leaders, and chroniclers. These institutions preserved the history and traditions of Ethiopia, ensuring that the stories of kings, battles, and spiritual achievements were passed down through the centuries. The written chronicles from this period provide invaluable insights into the society, politics, and daily life of medieval Ethiopia. The Solomonic dynasty's legacy is profound. By claiming descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, they created a narrative that connected Ethiopia to the broader biblical and world history. Through territorial expansion, military campaigns, and administrative reforms, they strengthened the kingdom and ensured its survival in a region often marked by conflict. By fostering literature, religion, and culture, they created a golden age that continues to inspire Ethiopians today. The dynasty's influence endured for centuries, shaping the nation's identity, governance, and cultural life long after its political power waned. Even today, the echoes of the Solomonic dynasty can be seen in Ethiopia's religious practices, literary traditions, and national consciousness. Churches and monasteries built during this era remain active centers of worship, while manuscripts and chronicles preserved in libraries and monasteries continue to be studied by scholars worldwide. The stories of kings, warriors, and scholars from the Solomonic period are not just historical accounts. They are part of a living cultural heritage that continues to define Ethiopia's unique place in the world. In conclusion, the Solomonic dynasty was more than a line of kings. It was a defining force in Ethiopian history. By linking their rule to divine ancestry, expanding the kingdom, navigating conflicts, and promoting a golden age of literature and culture, the dynasty forged a legacy that has endured for centuries. Their story is a testament to the resilience, vision, and creativity of a civilization that has remained independent and culturally rich in the heart of Africa. Ethiopia's Solomonic era reminds us that history is not merely a record of events, but a living tapestry of identity, faith, and achievement. Ethiopia's story in the 16th century is one of resilience in the face of foreign challenges and internal upheaval. Despite being an ancient and well-established kingdom, the Solomonic dynasty was not isolated. Its location in the Horn of Africa placed it at a crossroads of trade, religion, and military ambition. During this period, Ethiopia encountered new foreign powers and faced conflicts that would test the empire's strength, adaptability, and survival. One of the most significant foreign contacts came with the arrival of the Portuguese. In 1520, Portuguese explorers and missionaries reached Ethiopia, drawn by stories of a Christian kingdom that had resisted Muslim expansion for centuries. The Portuguese offered not only religious solidarity but also military support, introducing firearms and new strategies that would become vital in Ethiopia's ongoing struggles. This exchange was a double-edged sword. It provided Ethiopia with access to advanced technology, yet it also created new dependencies and exposed the kingdom to European political ambitions. At the same time, Ethiopia faced fierce threats from the Adal Sultanate, a neighboring Muslim state led by a formidable leader, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim Ogazi, often known as Ahmad Gan, or the left-handed Ahmad's rise marked a dramatic turning point in the region's history. He united various factions within Adal and launched a series of military campaigns that aimed to conquer Ethiopian territories and spread his influence. These invasions were swift and devastating, bringing large portions of the Ethiopian highlands under Adal control and challenging the authority of the Solomonic emperors. The wars with the Adal Sultanate were unlike anything Ethiopia had faced in previous centuries. Traditional warfare, which relied heavily on swords, spears, and cavalry, proved insufficient against the new military technology introduced by Ahmad's forces. He effectively utilized firearms, cannons, and siege tactics learned through contacts with the Ottoman Empire. This forced Ethiopia to adapt quickly, reshaping its military strategies and seeking alliances to counter the threat. The Portuguese support became crucial in this context, providing soldiers, firearms, and tactical advice that helped the Ethiopian forces regain lost ground. The conflict between Ethiopia and the Adal Sultanate was not merely a series of battles. It was a struggle for survival and identity. Religious differences heightened the intensity of the war. Ethiopia, as a Christian kingdom, sought to preserve its faith, culture, and independence, while Ahmad's campaigns were motivated by both political ambition and religious zeal. The highlands and lowlands became battlegrounds, with cities, monasteries, and trade routes caught in the crossfire. Civilians endured immense hardship, fleeing from advancing armies and witnessing the destruction of homes and farmland. Despite the devastation, the resilience of the Ethiopian people and the strategic leadership of the Solomonic emperors turned the tide. The marriage of traditional tactics with new Portuguese military technology proved decisive. Ethiopian forces learned to deploy firearms effectively, combine cavalry charges with artillery support, and fortify key positions. Over time, they were able to repel Ahmad's forces, reclaim lost territories, and reassert the authority of the Solomonic dynasty. This period demonstrated Ethiopia's ability to absorb external influences while preserving its independence and cultural identity. The wars also had lasting consequences for the region. They reshaped political boundaries, strengthened the Solomonic dynasty's legitimacy, and highlighted the importance of technological innovation in warfare. Ethiopia's experience with the Portuguese and the Adal Sultanate foreshadowed future interactions with European powers, revealing both opportunities for cooperation and risks of foreign intervention. The introduction of firearms and new military techniques permanently changed Ethiopian warfare, influencing how future rulers defended their kingdom. Culturally, this era left a profound imprint. The chronicles of the wars, often written by monks and court historians, provide detailed accounts of battles, strategies, and heroism. These writings preserve the memory of leaders like Emperor Giladius, who played a key role in resisting Ahmad's invasion, and celebrated the valor of soldiers and ordinary citizens alike. Religious institutions, despite being targeted in attacks, became symbols of endurance, maintaining Ethiopia's spiritual life and serving as centers of community support during times of turmoil. In summary, the 16th century was a pivotal moment in Ethiopian history, defined by foreign contacts, conflicts, and transformation. The arrival of the Portuguese introduced new technology and alliances. The rise of Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi and the expansion of the Adal Sultanate challenged the very existence of the Ethiopian state. Yet, through adaptation, resilience, and strategic alliances, Ethiopia not only survived but emerged stronger. This chapter demonstrates how external threats and internal ingenuity combined to shape a nation capable of preserving its independence, faith, and cultural identity in an ever-changing world. As the 16th century unfolded, Ethiopia faced some of the most dramatic challenges in its long history. The kingdom, proud and ancient, found itself confronting external forces whose ambitions and technology reshaped the balance of power in the Horn of Africa. Central to this period was the arrival of the Portuguese, whose presence would alter Ethiopia's military and political landscape. The Portuguese, drawn by reports of a Christian kingdom resisting Islamic expansion, arrived with gifts, soldiers, and firearms. They sought both religious alliance and influence, hoping to strengthen Ethiopia against its enemies while gaining a foothold in a strategically important region. For the Ethiopian emperors, Portuguese assistance was a lifeline. Their knowledge of gunpowder, cannons, and military organization offered tools that traditional Ethiopian armies had never possessed. Yet this foreign involvement came with challenges. Integrating European methods into Ethiopian warfare required adaptation, diplomacy, and sometimes compromise. At the same time, Ethiopia faced the relentless threat of the Adal Sultanate. Under the leadership of Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, known as Ahmad Grag, the Sultanate launched a campaign that would devastate much of the Ethiopian highlands. Ahmad's armies were formidable, disciplined, mobile, and armed with firearms acquired from Ottoman allies. Their tactics were aggressive, combining traditional cavalry assaults with gunpowder-based siege strategies that overwhelmed many Ethiopian fortifications. Entire towns and monasteries fell, and thousands of civilians fled the advancing armies, leaving a landscape scarred by conflict. Ahmad's rise represented more than a military threat. Was a profound challenge to Ethiopia's political and religious identity. His campaigns targeted not only territories but also the symbols of Christian authority. Monasteries and churches, long centers of learning and culture, were attacked, burned, or seized. This period tested the resilience of the Solomonic rulers, who had to defend their kingdom while maintaining the morale and unity of their people. Leaders such as Emperor Lebna Dengel and later Emperor Geladius emerged as critical figures in rallying resistance, coordinating defenses, and seeking foreign assistance to counter Ahmad's advances. One of the most striking aspects of this period was the changing nature of military technology. The introduction of firearms, cannons, and new siege techniques transformed the battlefield. Ethiopian armies, once reliant on spears, swords, and cavalry, now had to adapt to match the firepower of Ahmad's forces. Portuguese advisors trained Ethiopian soldiers in the use of matchlock guns and artillery, helping them develop tactics that combined traditional Ethiopian strategies with modern weapons. Over time, these adaptations proved crucial in turning the tide against the invaders, demonstrating Ethiopia's ability to integrate foreign innovations without losing its sovereignty. The wars with the Adal Sultanate and the foreign contacts that accompanied them had lasting consequences. Politically, they reinforced the authority of the Solomonic dynasty, proving the dynasty's resilience and legitimacy in defending the kingdom. Culturally, the conflict inspired chronicles, religious texts, and oral histories that preserved the memory of courage, sacrifice, and tactical ingenuity. Strategically, the period highlighted the importance of alliances, military innovation, and the ability to respond to rapidly changing threats, a lesson that would resonate throughout Ethiopian history. Ultimately, this period of foreign contact and conflict underscored Ethiopia's uniqueness in the region, a Christian kingdom that successfully navigated the pressures of Islamic expansion, foreign intervention, and technological change. Despite the destruction and upheaval, Ethiopia emerged stronger, having adapted to new realities while maintaining its cultural and religious identity. The story of Ahmad Gragny's invasions, Portuguese involvement, and military innovation stands as a testament to Ethiopia's enduring resilience and strategic acumen. The 19th century ushered in a transformative era for Ethiopia, an age marked by visionary emperors, ambitious reforms, and the struggle to unify a nation long divided by regional rivalries and foreign pressures. This period, often called the Age of Emperors, saw leaders who were determined not only to strengthen their central authority but also to modernize the kingdom and secure its independence in an increasingly interconnected world. It all began with Emperor Teledros II, a ruler of extraordinary vision and determination. Ascending to the throne in 1855, Teledros inherited a fragmented empire. Regional nobles wielded immense power, local militias operated independently, and internal conflicts threatened the stability of the Solomonic dynasty. Tewadros recognized that Ethiopia's survival depended on unifying its people under a strong central authority. He implemented sweeping reforms aimed at consolidating power, including reorganizing the military, centralizing tax collection, and attempting to modernize administration. He sought to reduce the influence of local rulers, ensuring that the emperor's authority extended to even the most remote provinces. Tewadros's reign was also marked by efforts to modernize the military. Understanding the importance of firearms and artillery, he sought European assistance, establishing contacts with British diplomats and requesting technological and military support. Unfortunately, misunderstandings and failed negotiations with foreign powers ultimately led to tension with Britain, culminating in the dramatic siege of Magdala in 1868. Tewadros' tragic death during the British expedition marked the end of his ambitious but unfinished reforms. Yet his vision of a united and modern Ethiopia laid the foundation for his successors. Following Tewadros II, Emperor Johannes IV rose to power in the late 19th century, inheriting a kingdom still divided and facing external threats. Johannes I's reign was dominated by both regional struggles and the need to defend Ethiopia from encroaching powers, particularly Egypt and modest forces from Sudan. Known as a pious and determined leader, Johannes sought to strengthen national unity while defending the nation's borders. His campaigns involved both diplomacy and warfare, often negotiating with local leaders to maintain loyalty while personally leading troops into battle. Under his leadership, Ethiopia retained its sovereignty despite immense pressure, earning respect both at home and abroad. The most celebrated figure of this era, however, was Emperor Menelik II, whose vision and leadership would define modern Ethiopia. Menelik ascended the throne in 1889, inheriting a nation that, while more unified than before, still faced internal divisions and the looming threat of European colonial ambitions. Menelik embarked on an ambitious program of modernization, expanding infrastructure, adopting new military technologies, and strengthening centralized administration. He recognized that Ethiopia's survival depended not only on unity but also on its ability to modernize and defend itself effectively. One of the crowning achievements of Menelik II's reign was the victory at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a moment that would resonate far beyond Ethiopia's borders. When Italian forces attempted to impose colonial control, Menelik mobilized a large, well-equipped army, integrating traditional warriors with troops trained in the use of modern rifles and artillery. The Ethiopian forces decisively defeated the Italians, ensuring Ethiopia's continued independence at a time when nearly all of Africa was being colonized. This victory became a symbol of national pride and resistance against imperialism, demonstrating that Ethiopia could defend itself against foreign powers through strategy, unity, and modernized military strength. Menelik II also pursued territorial expansion, incorporating diverse regions into the Ethiopian Empire and extending its influence across the Horn of Africa. This expansion not only increased the kingdom's geographic and economic strength but also brought together a mosaic of peoples under a single political authority. Through diplomacy, conquest, and strategic alliances, Menelik created a more cohesive state, laying the groundwork for Ethiopia's identity as a sovereign, modern nation. The Age of Emperors was therefore a period of transformation and consolidation. From Tewadros II's visionary but unfinished reforms to Johannes IV's defense of sovereignty, and Menelik II's modernization and triumph at Adwa, Ethiopia emerged from centuries of fragmentation as a united, resilient, and independent state. This era showed that leadership, vision, and adaptability could preserve national identity and sovereignty even in the face of internal division and external threats. Culturally and socially, the period also fostered a sense of Ethiopian pride and unity. The emperors encouraged literature, religious scholarship, and historical chronicles, ensuring that the stories of resilience, leadership, and victory were preserved for future generations. Ethiopia's victories during this era were not just military, they were symbolic affirmations of a nation capable of standing strong in a world increasingly dominated by colonial powers. In conclusion, the Age of Emperors and Unification represents one of the most significant chapters in Ethiopian history. It was an era of vision, courage, and determination, in which emperors reshaped the political landscape, modernized the nation, defended sovereignty, and fostered unity. From Tawadros to Menelik to Ethiopia navigated internal challenges and external threats, emerging stronger and more cohesive than ever before. This period set the stage for Ethiopia's place as a proud, independent, and enduring nation in the modern era. The 19th century was a turning point for Ethiopia, a time when visionary rulers sought to unify the kingdom, modernize its structures, and defend it against both internal divisions and external threats. This period, often called the Age of Emperors, showcased the ambition, courage, and strategic brilliance of leaders determined to secure Ethiopia's sovereignty and shape its future. The era began with Emperor Tawadros II, who ascended the throne in 1855 during a period of fragmentation. Ethiopia was divided, regional nobles wielded immense power, local militias acted independently, and central authority was weak. Tewodros recognized that the survival and progress of the kingdom depended on strong, centralized leadership. He launched ambitious reforms aimed at consolidating power, reorganizing the military, and improving administration. Taxes were standardized, provincial governors were brought under tighter control, and efforts were made to modernize the army. Tawadros's vision was clear: a unified, disciplined, and modern Ethiopia capable of resisting both internal disorder and foreign threats. Tawadros II also understood the importance of technology and foreign alliances. He reached out to Europe, particularly Britain, seeking skilled technicians, weapons, and military advisors. European firearms, artillery, and modern military techniques became critical tools in his effort to strengthen the empire. However, diplomatic misunderstandings with the British led to the dramatic siege of Magdala in 1868, which ended tragically with Tewodros's death. Though his reign was cut short, his reforms and vision for a united Ethiopia set a foundation that future emperors would build upon. Following Tewodros, Emperor Johannes IV faced the challenge of maintaining unity while defending Ethiopia from external threats. His reign was marked by regional struggles, as local leaders resisted central authority and external powers tested Ethiopia's borders. Johannes IV's leadership was defined by both military skill and religious devotion. He personally led campaigns against Egyptian forces in the north and resisted the expansion of the Mahdist movement from Sudan. These military efforts were coupled with diplomacy, as Johannes negotiated with local rulers to maintain loyalty and stability within the empire. His reign reinforced Ethiopia's sovereignty and demonstrated the delicate balance between central authority and regional autonomy. The most celebrated figure of this period was Emperor Menelik II, who took the throne in 1889. Menelik inherited a kingdom that, while more unified than before, faced ongoing internal divisions and the looming threat of European colonial expansion. Understanding the changing world, Menelik embarked on a program of modernization. He reorganized the army, improved infrastructure, established telegraph lines, and introduced new technologies, all aimed at strengthening the state. Menelik also expanded the administration to bring distant regions under central control, creating a more cohesive and capable government. Menelik II's reign is perhaps best remembered for the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a defining moment in Ethiopian history. When Italian forces attempted to impose colonial control, Menelik mobilized a large, disciplined army, combining traditional warriors with troops trained in the use of modern rifles and artillery. The Ethiopian forces achieved a decisive victory, securing the country's independence and sending shockwaves across Africa and Europe. The victory at Adwa was more than a military triumph. It was a symbol of national pride, resilience, and unity, demonstrating that Ethiopia could defend its sovereignty against a modern European power. Beyond Adwa, Menelik pursued territorial expansion, incorporating diverse regions into the Ethiopian empire. Through a combination of diplomacy, conquest, and alliances, he extended the empire's boundaries to include the southern and southwestern territories, laying the foundation for modern Ethiopia. This expansion strengthened the kingdom economically, politically, and strategically, and brought together a mosaic of ethnic and cultural groups under one political authority. Culturally and socially, the Age of Emperors fostered a sense of national identity and pride. Chronicles, religious texts, and oral histories celebrated the deeds of emperors, warriors, and leaders who defended the nation. Literature, art, and scholarship flourished, reflecting the achievements of a society navigating modernization while preserving its ancient heritage. Religious institutions continued to play a vital role, serving as centers of learning, culture, and community cohesion. In summary, the Age of Emperors and Unification was a period of vision, courage, and strategic transformation. From Tewodros II's ambitious reforms to Johannes IV's defense of sovereignty, and Menelik II's modernization, victory at Adwa, and territorial expansion, Ethiopia emerged as a more unified, resilient, and independent state. This era demonstrated that leadership, innovation, and determination could preserve a nation's identity and independence, even in a rapidly changing world. The legacies of these emperors continue to shape Ethiopia's political, cultural, and historical identity to this day. The 20th century brought new challenges for Ethiopia, as European imperial ambitions collided with the nation's enduring sovereignty. Despite centuries of independence, Ethiopia faced the threat of colonization from Italy, whose leaders were determined to expand their empire in Africa. The nation's resilience would be tested once again, during a period that combined military struggle, international diplomacy, and the courage of a people determined to remain free. The first attempt by Italy to colonize Ethiopia occurred in 1895 to 1896, shortly after the Battle of Adwa, in which Ethiopian forces had decisively defeated the Italians. Despite the humiliating loss, Italian ambitions did not waver. The first invasion was repelled largely due to Ethiopia's well-organized military and strategic use of terrain. This victory at Adwa became a symbol of national pride, a reminder that Ethiopia could resist foreign domination even against a European power armed with modern weapons. However, the threat remained, and the seeds of future conflict were sown. The real challenge came decades later, under Benito Mussolini, who sought to fulfill Italy's imperial ambitions in Africa during the 1930s. The second Italian invasion, beginning in 1935, was far more aggressive and technologically advanced than the previous attempt. Italian forces used modern weaponry, including aircraft, tanks, and chemical weapons, to overwhelm Ethiopian defenses. Despite fierce resistance by Ethiopian soldiers and local militias, the Italians occupied much of the country, forcing Emperor Haile Selassie into exile. Haile Selassie's exile was not the end of Ethiopia's fight. From abroad, he became a symbol of national resilience and a voice for his country on the global stage. In 1936, he delivered a historic speech to the League of Nations, appealing to the international community to recognize the aggression of fascist Italy and to support Ethiopia's sovereignty. His appeal highlighted the principles of justice, self-determination, and collective security, bringing attention to the plight of Ethiopia and inspiring anti-colonial movements worldwide. Though immediate action by the League was limited, Selassie's words ensured that Ethiopia's struggle could not be ignored. Meanwhile, resistance within Ethiopia continued. Guerrilla warfare, local uprisings, and coordinated attacks against Italian forces kept hope alive. Ethiopian patriots, both in the countryside and urban centers, refused to submit fully to the occupation, preserving the spirit of independence and national identity. This internal resistance was crucial, as it maintained the continuity of Ethiopian sovereignty in principle, if not yet in practice. The tide began to turn during World War II, when the global conflict weakened Italy's grip on its colonies. Allied forces, alongside Ethiopian resistance fighters, mounted a coordinated campaign to liberate the country. In 1941, Ethiopian forces, supported by the British military, successfully restored Haile Selassie to the throne, marking the end of Italian occupation. The liberation of Ethiopia was not merely a military victory, was a reaffirmation of national identity, sovereignty, and the enduring strength of a people who had refused to yield to foreign domination. After liberation, Ethiopia faced the formidable task of post-war rebuilding. Years of occupation had devastated infrastructure, disrupted governance, and caused immense human suffering. Haile Selassie undertook efforts to modernize administration, strengthen the military, and improve education and healthcare. Roads, telegraph systems, and public institutions were reconstructed to unify the country and facilitate governance. Culturally, the liberation inspired renewed pride, as Ethiopians celebrated their resilience and reaffirmed their unique history as one of the few African nations to have resisted European colonization successfully. The Italian invasions and World War II left a profound impact on Ethiopia's national consciousness. They highlighted the ongoing threat of foreign aggression, the importance of international diplomacy, and the courage of leaders and citizens alike. Haile Selassie's role, both as a monarch and a global advocate, cemented his legacy as a symbol of Ethiopian sovereignty and resilience. The experience of occupation and liberation also strengthened the commitment to modernization, unity, and national defense in the decades that followed. In summary, the Italian invasions and the events of World War II were defining moments in Ethiopia's modern history. From the initial attempted conquest to the second invasion under Mussolini, through Haile Selassie's exile and international appeal, and finally, to liberation and post-war reconstruction, Ethiopia demonstrated extraordinary resilience. This chapter of history serves as a testament to the courage, unity, and determination of a nation that refused to surrender its independence, even in the face of overwhelming external forces. The struggle of Ethiopia during the 20th century reached a dramatic peak with the Italian invasions, a period that tested the resilience, courage, and unity of the nation. Though Ethiopia had survived centuries of conflict and resisted colonization during the Battle of Adwa, the world had changed. Italy, under the fascist rule of Benito Mussolini, was determined to expand its empire in Africa, and Ethiopia became its prime target. The first Italian attempt at colonization had already ended in humiliation at Adwa in 1896, but the memory of that defeat did not deter Mussolini. By the mid-1930s, Italy launched a second invasion, far more aggressive and technologically advanced than the previous one. Italian forces employed modern weapons, including tanks, aircraft, and even chemical weapons, to overpower Ethiopian defenses. Despite the valiant resistance of Ethiopian soldiers, local militias, and volunteers from all over the country, the Italians quickly captured major cities and forced Emperor Haile Selassie to flee into exile. Haile Selassie's departure was not a surrender. It marked the beginning of a new front in international diplomacy. From exile, he addressed the League of Nations in 1936, delivering a powerful speech that appealed to the world for support. He condemned Italy's aggression, highlighting the threat it posed, not only to Ethiopia but to international law and the principles of justice, though the League's response was weak and largely symbolic. Haile Selassie's appeal made Ethiopia's plight known globally and inspired resistance movements across Africa. His speeches symbolized the unbroken spirit of a nation that refused to be erased. Meanwhile, within Ethiopia, resistance continued relentlessly. Guerrilla warfare became the lifeblood of the struggle. Farmers, villagers, and former soldiers launched raids on Italian supply lines, liberated towns temporarily, and maintained Ethiopian morale. This decentralized resistance played a crucial role in weakening Italian control, keeping hope alive, and preserving Ethiopian national identity even under occupation. The bravery of ordinary citizens during this period remains one of the most inspiring chapters in Ethiopia's history. The turning point came during World War II, when the global conflict created conditions that Ethiopia could exploit. Allied forces, particularly the British, coordinated with Ethiopian resistance fighters to mount a campaign to reclaim the country. By 1941, Haile Selassie returned triumphantly to Addis Ababa, restored to the throne, and the Italian occupation ended. The liberation of Ethiopia was not just a military victory, it was a powerful reaffirmation of sovereignty, national unity, and the resilience of a people who had refused to bow to foreign domination. Following liberation, Ethiopia faced the daunting task of post-war rebuilding. Years of occupation had devastated infrastructure, disrupted governance, and caused significant human suffering. Haile Selassie embarked on an ambitious program to restore roads, schools, hospitals, and government institutions. Efforts were also made to modernize administration and strengthen the military to prevent future invasions. Cultural restoration became a priority, as Ethiopians celebrated their history, resilience, and identity through literature, art, and religious traditions. The Italian invasions in World War II had profound and lasting effects on Ethiopia. They demonstrated the importance of unity, strategic leadership, and international awareness. They also reinforced Ethiopia's unique status as one of the few African nations to successfully resist European colonization. Haile Selassie's leadership, both in exile and upon his return, became a symbol of courage and international advocacy, while the continued resistance of the Ethiopian people highlighted the nation's enduring spirit. In conclusion, this period of foreign aggression, exile, and liberation represents one of the most dramatic chapters in Ethiopia's modern history. From the first Italian attempt to the second invasion under Mussolini, from Haile Selassie's exile and global appeal to the eventual liberation and post-war rebuilding, Ethiopia demonstrated extraordinary resilience. This chapter illustrates not only the challenges of survival in a colonial era but also the courage, unity, and determination that have defined Ethiopian history across centuries. The 20th century brought enormous challenges to Ethiopia, even after centuries of resilience, independence, and successful resistance to colonialism. Following the liberation from Italian occupation and the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie, the nation seemed poised for stability and modernization. Yet, the 1970s marked a dramatic shift in Ethiopia's history. The long-standing monarchy collapsed, giving way to a turbulent era defined by military rule, ideological experiments, civil war, and widespread suffering. This period, known as the Derg era, reshaped Ethiopia politically, socially, and economically, leaving scars that would last decades. The decline of the monarchy was not sudden. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Ethiopia was facing multiple pressures. Economic stagnation, widespread poverty, and growing inequality created frustration among peasants and urban workers alike. Droughts and famines compounded the hardships, exposing the limits of the imperial government's ability to respond effectively. Students and intellectuals in Addis Ababa began demanding reforms. While various political groups criticized Haile Selassie for failing to modernize the nation and address social injustices, the monarchy, once a symbol of unity and continuity, now appeared increasingly distant and incapable of addressing the needs of the people. In 1974, this mounting discontent culminated in the fall of the monarchy. A military committee known as the Derg, initially formed to address grievances within the armed forces, seized power and deposed Emperor Haile Selassie. The emperor, who had ruled for nearly 5 decades and symbolized Ethiopia's long-standing tradition of monarchy, was placed under house arrest and would later die in captivity under mysterious circumstances. The fall of Haile Selassie marked the end of the Solomonic line's centuries-old rule, closing a chapter that had connected modern Ethiopia to ancient biblical and historical narratives. The Derg, initially a council of military officers, quickly consolidated power under the leadership of Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mengistu's rise was marked by ruthless political maneuvering, as he eliminated rival factions within the military committee and established a centralized, authoritarian regime. The Derg adopted Marxist-Leninist ideology, seeking to transform Ethiopia through radical social, political, and economic reforms. Land reform was one of the first policies implemented, aimed at redistributing land from wealthy landlords to peasants. While the reform had the potential to address historic inequalities, its execution was chaotic, often violent, and poorly managed. One of the darkest periods of Mengistu's rule was the Red Terror, beginning in 1977, intended to eliminate political opposition. This campaign of mass violence targeted perceived enemies of the regime, including students, intellectuals, former government officials, and rival political groups. Thousands were executed or disappeared, often in public displays of brutality meant to instill fear. The Red Terror not only decimated Ethiopia's political and intellectual class but also created an atmosphere of paranoia and oppression, leaving deep psychological scars across the nation. During the Derg era, Ethiopia also faced widespread famine and economic collapse. Poor agricultural policies, combined with droughts and internal conflict, led to catastrophic food shortages, particularly in the northern regions. Reports of famine reached the international community, highlighting the human cost of political mismanagement and warfare. Millions of Ethiopians suffered from hunger, disease, and displacement, and the nation's economy struggled under the weight of centralization, militarization, and poorly planned development projects. The combination of famine, repression, and economic stagnation intensified dissatisfaction with the Derg regime and fueled the rise of armed resistance movements. The Derg era was marked by prolonged civil war. Various opposition groups emerged, representing ethnic, regional, and ideological interests. The Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), the Eritrean People's Liberation Front (EPLF), and other factions waged insurgencies against Mengistu's government, seeking autonomy, independence, or regime change. The conflict was devastating. Battles ravaged towns and villages. Civilians were caught in crossfire, and millions were displaced from their homes. Ethiopia's northern regions, in particular, became epicenters of violence, as the Derg's military campaigns sought to suppress the insurgencies with overwhelming force. The civil war also highlighted Ethiopia's complex ethnic and regional dynamics. Groups that had long histories of autonomy or distinct cultural identities resisted central control, seeing the Derg's militarized policies as oppressive. This period of armed struggle not only destabilized the country politically but also reshaped its social and demographic landscape as communities were uprooted. Traditional governance structures were disrupted, and entire generations grew up in a state of conflict and fear. Despite the immense suffering, the 1980s also saw the emergence of international attention and aid, particularly in response to famine and humanitarian crises. Images of starving children and displaced families brought Ethiopia's plight to global awareness, inspiring relief efforts and humanitarian campaigns. Yet these interventions were often complicated by the ongoing conflict, as both the Derg regime and rebel groups sought to control access to aid, sometimes exacerbating suffering rather than alleviating it. The path to change culminated in the late 1980s and early 1990s. As the Derg's grip on power weakened, internal dissent, ongoing military defeats, and the collapse of global support for communist regimes created conditions for the regime's fall. In 1991, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, led by the TPLF, captured Addis Ababa, effectively ending Mengistu's rule. The fall of the Derg brought an end to a violent and tumultuous chapter in Ethiopian history, opening the door to efforts at reconstruction, reconciliation, and the establishment of a new federal system intended to address the nation's ethnic and regional complexities. The legacy of the Derg era is profound and multifaceted. On one hand, it represents a period of extreme suffering, authoritarianism, and social disruption, with millions of lives lost or permanently affected by violence and famine. On the other hand, the resistance movements, civil society efforts, and eventual transition laid the groundwork for Ethiopia's ongoing struggles to balance central authority, ethnic autonomy, and national unity. The era serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of concentrated power, ideological rigidity, and neglect of social welfare, while also highlighting the resilience and determination of the Ethiopian people to survive and rebuild. Culturally, the Derg period disrupted traditional institutions and social networks, but it also produced a generation deeply aware of the importance of political participation, human rights, and civic responsibility. Literature, music, and art from this era reflect both the trauma of oppression and the hope for change. Chroniclers, journalists, and historians have documented the era extensively, ensuring that future generations understand the consequences of dictatorship and the sacrifices made by ordinary Ethiopians in their struggle for freedom and stability. Economically, the Derg's policies left long-term challenges. Agricultural mismanagement, forced resettlement programs, and war-induced destruction weakened the economy and created structural problems that persisted even after the regime fell. Post-Derg governments faced the difficult task of revitalizing agriculture, rebuilding infrastructure, and fostering sustainable development while managing the legacies of inequality and displacement. Politically, the Derg era reshaped Ethiopia's governance landscape. The transition from monarchy to military dictatorship, followed by civil war and eventual federalism, reflects the nation's ongoing struggle to balance central authority with ethnic and regional autonomy. Lessons from this period continue to influence debates on governance, decentralization, and national identity, demonstrating the enduring impact of these decades of turmoil. In conclusion, the Derg era and civil war was one of Ethiopia's most challenging and transformative periods. The fall of the monarchy, the rise of Mengistu's military regime, the horrors of the Red Terror, famine, economic collapse, and prolonged civil war left indelible marks on the nation. Yet, amid the suffering, the resilience, resistance, and determination of the Ethiopian people paved the way for change. The eventual overthrow of the Derg and the country's move toward a new political order illustrate the capacity for recovery, adaptation, and renewal, even after decades of oppression and conflict. This chapter in Ethiopian history is a powerful testament to the costs of authoritarianism and the enduring strength of a nation that refuses to be broken. The fall of the Derg in 1991 marked the beginning of a new era in Ethiopian history. After nearly 2 decades of military dictatorship, civil war, and widespread suffering, the nation faced the enormous task of rebuilding itself politically, socially, and economically. The end of the Derg brought both hope and uncertainty, a chance to move past authoritarianism, famine, and internal conflict, but also the challenge of managing a diverse country with deep ethnic, regional, and political complexities. The transition began with the establishment of a federal system under the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, led by the Tigray People's Liberation Front TP. The new constitution, ratified in 1995, created a federal republic based on ethnic federalism, dividing the country into ethnically defined regions known as states or nations, nationalities, and peoples regions. Each region was granted significant autonomy, including the right to secede under certain conditions. This approach aimed to resolve the historical tensions between the central government and Ethiopia's diverse ethnic groups by giving local populations control over governance, language, and cultural preservation. The early years of federalism were marked by rebuilding and reform. The government prioritized infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Seeking to address the long-term damage left by the Derg era, roads, bridges, and telecommunications networks were reconstructed, while schools and universities expanded to meet the growing demand for education. Economic reforms were introduced to encourage investment, agricultural development, and industrial growth. These efforts began to stabilize the country, allowing Ethiopia to gradually reassert itself both internally and on the international stage. However, the transition was not without challenges. Ethiopia's ethnic diversity, while celebrated in the constitution, also created tensions. Local and regional leaders sometimes clashed with the central government, and disputes over land, resources, and political representation occasionally escalated into violent conflict. Ethnic-based political parties gained prominence, but the fragmentation of political power also complicated national governance. Balancing regional autonomy with national unity became a constant and delicate task for Ethiopia's leaders. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Ethiopia experienced significant economic growth. Investments in infrastructure, energy, and agriculture contributed to rising GDP and improvements in living standards. Addis Ababa transformed into a hub for commerce, education, and international diplomacy. Hydroelectric projects, such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, symbolized both Ethiopia's ambitions and its role as a regional power. Modernization efforts also included technology adoption, industrial parks, and urban development, creating new opportunities while reshaping traditional ways of life. Politically, Ethiopia faced periodic unrest and challenges. Border disputes, notably with Eritrea, led to the Eritrean-Ethiopian War from 1998 to 2000, which claimed tens of thousands of lives and caused widespread displacement. Internal ethnic tensions occasionally flared into violence, demonstrating that federalism, while offering autonomy, also required careful management to prevent fragmentation. Political reform and democratization remained ongoing goals, as successive governments navigated the tension between stability, representation, and civil liberties. Despite these challenges, Ethiopia's role on the African and global stage grew. The country became a hub for diplomacy, hosting the African Union's headquarters in Addis Ababa and participating actively in regional peacekeeping and conflict resolution. Ethiopia's strategic location in the Horn of Africa, combined with its historical legacy and population size, made it an influential actor in continental politics. International partnerships, trade agreements, and participation in multilateral organizations strengthened Ethiopia's global presence, reflecting its emergence as a nation capable of shaping regional affairs. Modern development in Ethiopia has been remarkable in many areas. Cities expanded rapidly, with modern infrastructure, housing, and commercial centers transforming the urban landscape. Access to technology and telecommunications improved dramatically, connecting rural and urban communities and fostering new economic and educational opportunities. Ethiopia's energy sector, particularly hydroelectric and renewable projects, became a source of national pride and a key factor in regional development. Social initiatives aimed at improving healthcare, reducing poverty, and expanding education gradually improved quality of life. Although progress has been uneven across regions, yet Ethiopia's path to modernization has not been linear. Ethnic tensions and conflicts have periodically destabilized parts of the country, leading to displacement, humanitarian crises, and political uncertainty. Efforts to maintain national cohesion while respecting regional autonomy remain a central challenge. Leaders continue to navigate the balance between federal authority and local control, seeking solutions that prevent violence, promote equity, and sustain economic growth. By 2025, Ethiopia stands as a nation of contrasts, a country with deep historical roots and proud traditions, experiencing rapid development and modernization, yet still grappling with political, social, and ethnic challenges. Its economy continues to grow, cities are expanding, and infrastructure projects reflect ambitions for a prosperous future. At the same time, the legacies of past conflicts and governance struggles remind the nation that progress requires vigilance, inclusivity, and the careful balancing of diversity with unity. Ethiopia's history from 1991 to 2025 is therefore a story of resilience, transformation, and hope. The transition from the Derg's authoritarian rule to federal democracy, the efforts to modernize and expand economically, and the ongoing management of ethnic and political tensions all demonstrate the nation's capacity to confront challenges and adapt to change. This period shows that while Ethiopia's path has been complex and often difficult, its people have consistently sought stability, prosperity, and dignity. In conclusion, Ethiopia in 2025 is a nation with a rich and complex legacy, shaped by centuries of struggle, resistance, and renewal. From rebuilding after the fall of the Derg, implementing federalism, achieving economic and technological progress, and navigating political challenges, Ethiopia's story is one of resilience and aspiration. Its place in Africa and the world reflects both historical achievements and contemporary ambitions. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Ethiopia's incredible history. From ancient dynasties to modern challenges, Ethiopia has faced adversity, yet its spirit has always endured. If you found this journey through time engaging and insightful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Past pictures and stories like these are the heartbeat of our channel, and your support helps us bring history to life. Stay tuned for more fascinating chapters from Ethiopia and beyond, as we continue exploring the events, people and cultures that shaped our world.